Okay, folks, so this video is an intellectual prep resource trying to explain where my mind was when I created this huge document of intellectual prep. And sort of this document, the 9 pages of it, is kind of overkill, but this is just trying to show my thinking around how I came up with the lessons that I come up with for lesson 8, lesson 1, grade 8, unit 1. So basically the first thing I want to do is I want to open up KnowAtom, and we're going to find the teacher unit. You always want to work from the teacher unit, but you also are going to want to open up the lab manual, the student lab manual, because it's just easier to read in there, and you're going to see it the way that kids are going to see it. So I always like to open up both of them. And so I have my teacher one and my student one. So as you can see, the teacher one's 124 pages. That's for the whole unit. That is a lot of reading. That is not something that I ever do. I would never read all of this 124 pages. I would skip around a lot. I would read stuff in different places. And so I kind of want to take you through how I go about this chronologically. I think it's important to read these common misconceptions, especially if you're teaching the content itself for the first time. But just skim those, think about them, note them, whatever. This is kind of an overview, but again, I would skip that once you know what you want to do, once you understand what the unit is about itself, and you want to plan it, you're going to skip down to the unit goals. And you're going to pull those unit goals out. And I put them right at the top, because those are always what we want to think about. And these unit goals are for the whole unit, but I've highlighted 1 and 2 because lessons 1 and 2, or goals 1 and 2, are what are going to get covered by this lesson. And how do I know that? Well, as I go through the curriculum, it tells me what standards are going to be used for the whole unit. I went and pulled out the ones that are going to be specific to this lesson, because I know what that lesson is. It also says it right here, right? So lesson 1, you're going to have this. Lesson 1, you're going to have this. Lesson 1, you're going to have this. Lesson 1, I pulled those ones out. I didn't pull out the supporting standards and put them in there because I want to stay focused on what I'm focused on. These are the 4 that I need to be focused on. There's also the standards. These are the standards. There's also the science and engineering practices, which again are listed here. And in lesson 1, they tell you all the ones that you're going to use, and they tell you how you're going to use them. So I just went ahead and listed them and gave a little short description of what they're basically going to do. So for developing and using models, they're going to make a visual model that shows that the law of conservation of mass. It's a little more complicated than that, but I kind of pulled it out as developing and using models, showing that mass is conserved by showing that atoms are rearranged but conserved. And this is just to kind of wrap my mind around, okay, these are the skills that we're going to need. These are the content knowledges that we're going to need to achieve. And these are the goals of the unit. And so this kind of fits into what I had talked about yesterday when I talked about you're always working from 2 columns of information. You're working from the state framework, which is the standards and the practices. You cannot change that. You need to meet those standards. And then there is what's in the curriculum, which would be these goals, right? So these can be modified. They can be scaffolded for. They can even be manipulated a little bit. But this is what the curriculum itself is trying to do. And then this right here, the summative lesson objective, is what lesson 1's mastery objective is. So yesterday we looked at mastery objectives being like, what is the end that we can have in mind, and then what are the steps we need to take. This is the end, right? The summative lesson objective. And so where did I get that? Well, I had to kind of scroll down all the way to lesson 1. All this stuff is overview, but then I'm going to scroll down past all of the reading, the student reading. I'm going to scroll down past all of that to where we get to lesson 1. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, so lesson 1. Lesson 1, it looks like it's just a lab, right? It looks like, oh, this lesson 1 is where we do this lab. No, lesson 1 is all the steps leading up to the lab and the lab itself. And in order to do the lab, in order to complete this mastery objective, students are going to analyze and observe the properties and thermal data produced by the combination of two substances to determine if a chemical reaction has occurred. Now, what they're doing in the lab is they're combining two substances. How they're going to determine it is something that they need to know and learn along the way, right? So they're not just going to be able to do this lab and achieve this objective. They need to do some stuff along the way. So we've pulled out that objective. We've pulled out all the standards. We've pulled out all the high-level stuff that we're doing. Now let's start to zoom in. So there's, like I said, there's going to be pre-work. There's going to be stuff you need to do before you can achieve this objective. And KnowAtom tells you what that is. If you scroll down a little, this teacher preparation is for what you'd need to do actually for the lab, but then there is this student reading preparation. Basically, for lesson 1, section 1 of the reading goes with lesson 1. Lesson 2, section 2. Lesson 3, section 3. You don't even really need to look this up eventually. You're going to know that section 1 goes with lesson 1. What you need to look up is the Socratic dialogues, which are the big ideas that you're going to have to get to. And so what I've done is I've looked through all this and I've pulled out the big ideas. All right, so they're going to appear on my document like this. First, we have this Unit 1, Section 1 lab manual. I've pulled out all the sections of that lab manual. I've pulled out all the vocabulary because I went to the lab manual, I looked through it, and I found, let's get past this intro section, right? So I pulled out these headers and I pulled out these vocabulary words. So I can find those in here somewhere. I may have just had to pull those out from the student manual, but either way, that's what I did, right? I got those vocab that appear, and then I took these big ideas out of the section. So I've highlighted it here, right? So we have Unit 1, Section 1. It has all these different sections in the reading. It has all this vocabulary. We have a Socratic dialogue that's supposed to cover this big idea. We're supposed to cover this big idea, and we're supposed to cover this big idea. Right? And then, of course, we have to prep a lab. There is some chemicals that we need to use, so we should probably learn about those chemicals. Now, what is the central skills? What are the central things that we need to do in this summative assessment? So from here, I went to the student lab manual, and I looked at the experiment that they have to do. Okay, and so this experiment, right, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to record a claim about how they can tell if a chemical reaction happens. They're going to take some data in some tables. They're going to take some more data. They're going to revisit their data and see if it is supported, see if it supports the claims. They're going to explain if those claims, why those claims, etc., etc. And so then they're also going to look at this model, and then they are going to explain that model. And so I pulled out all that information as being these central skills, right? That is the assessment, that is the test at the end, which is also a lab, but it's a test And these are the things we're going to have to do, right? We need to make claims, we need to record data, we need to revisit our tables, we need to revisit our claims, we need to use a visual model to connect our understanding. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of stuff that we need to do, and we need to prepare them for that. So this section is all stuff that I just looked up and made up myself. Stuff that I think might be helpful in getting there, right? Because if we have to do these things, we need to have a solid understanding of the content. We also might need some practice with making claims. What is a claim? Using a table for data in general, those little things as well. And so these are all things that I made up just out of my own head. And so this guided reading questions, right? These are below here. Those are all the guided reading questions. Okay, I made up all of these. And how did I make them up? Well, I literally just went into the reading and I read through and thought, okay, what is the most important stuff that's in this reading? Not just the stuff that appears in the reading, but the most important stuff. How do I know what's most important? Well, remember, I pulled out the big ideas. What is the stuff in the text that's going to help us understand that atoms and molecules make up our world? How are they going to read? What are they going to read that helps them understand that a chemical reaction occurred? That's the stuff that I'm looking for in my guided reading, and those are the questions that I made up. Then I just kind of pulled out some resources, right? So big idea number 4, they're supposed to watch a video, so I put the link for the video. Build a molecule, right? This is an online simulation where kids can build a molecule and interact with it. There's a couple videos here, just stuff that I thought might be helpful. Might fall its way into this unit, maybe it won't. Okay. Now, to sequence my unit, right? This is going to be a couple of days. It's not going to be one day. And so where do I get that? Well, this is where you scroll back up to the pacing guide. Okay, well, the pacing guide says that I have 1 day to read the lab manual. I have 1 day to do Socratic dialogue. I have 1 day to start the investigation, 1 day to complete and do the model for the investigation, and then 1 day as a class to go through the investigation. Now, just from experience, I know that the KnowAtom lab manual is long and it will be hard to finish in one class, so I think I'm going to chunk it in a different way. The Socratic dialogue is usually long and boring, so I'm going to chunk it in a different way. I'm probably going to spread out this over at least these 2 days, right? Some dialogue, some reading, some dialogue, some reading. I know that it will take them probably this amount of time to get through the investigation, but I look at this and I say, my kids are going to need more support. And so I actually added in some days to kind of draw out these big ideas that are supposed to come out in Socratic dialogue. So I'm really only supposed to have 5 days. I ended up with 7 days. Okay? And you'll see kind of the stuff that I added in there. So number 1, instead of starting with the reading, I started with dialogue. Instead of starting with the reading, I'm starting with the concrete video. The video, why does it have a different set of properties than the stuff that makes it up? Then, after we watch that video, we do a little dialogue. We're going to do most of the reading. Finish up some reading for homework, maybe come back, get a little bit more reading, do a little bit more dialogue on day 2. This allows me to kind of chunk it up and use the relevant portions of the reading to flush out the ideas that the kids are going to have on those days. Day 3 would have normally been the day you start the activity, but I don't think we're ready there. I think we need some more time doing the modeling and learning about molecules and atoms, and just from experience, I know that it takes a little time. So I would put in this day to get hands-on with something I know I have in the lab, the little balls with the sticks that fit together, atoms, molecules, bam. or this PhET simulation, if we're online, we're going to look at something, we're going to do some simulating to get a little bit more of an understanding before we jump into this lab. On day 4, we're going to try to cement this understanding a little bit before we begin the lab, and we're going to get what I believe is a really high-level open response question, which is going to challenge them to think. And so we're going to do this dialogue. They're going to give me this first attempt, and I've got this open response below. Okay, way down here. All right, really high-level question. Kids are probably going to struggle with it, but the idea here is that we would revisit this again later in the unit. We would have kids revise and rewrite and see their learning as they go. But again, this is something that I created as a supplement to try to pull out more skills and more rigor from KnowAtom. And day 5, we're going to do the investigation. I broke it up so that we're like only going to do the baking soda and vinegar probably. And then we're going to kind of begin the visual model, because if we go back to the unit, right, the model you're making is for baking soda and vinegar. So it might make sense to sort of break it up in this way and do like, okay, everyone do this experiment, come back, we'll talk about it, right? That's how it makes sense in my mind, so that I can keep every kid on track and we don't have materials half finished in the middle of a lab that they need to revisit tomorrow. It can get messy because of time. So I try to chunk it up if I can. Day 6, we're going to go ahead and complete the hands-on portion. They're going to do the other experiment where they do the exact same process but with different chemicals. This should go a little faster, give you some time to answer the investigation questions, which are the meat and potatoes of your assessment. And then this last day is probably only half of a day, because we're going to go over those investigation questions. After they've turned them in, we're going to talk about, okay, I looked at a few of these. These are some things that I saw were good about them. These are some things that I want to tighten up as we move forward in this unit, and sort of give them some feedback, even if you can't grade them and turn them back right away. And so that's sort of how I sequence it. Day 7 is probably a day that is something valuable. If you value these investigation questions, you know, having some value in going over them and what the correct answers should be is something I wouldn't necessarily cut out. If you were going to shorten this to the KnowAtom timeline, you wouldn't be able to do this additional activity on day 3, and you would need to really tighten up how long it takes you in the investigation. But I am of the mind that in the beginning of the year, you want to really set them up for success and really be able to hold them to a high level of accountability with these investigations. And so giving them that extra day is something I don't mind doing. I've just, again, pulled out the keywords and talked about some ways that we're going to do this. Most of the time I do my vocabulary through homework, because as you can see, there's not really a day here to do explicit vocabulary. But on the days where we're doing Socratic dialogue and we're doing the reading, those terms are going to be part of my questioning. And so this isn't even all of the stuff that I would need to make up. I would still need to make up activators, exit tickets, and things along the way throughout my day-to-day, but I've sequenced it now. I know how it can work. And the last note here is like these highlighting things. I've highlighted the questions that I would go in round and check. So I know that this hits really centrally on the standard, so I'm going to go around and make sure that everybody got that one right. This one, I want it to stop here, I want it to regroup, I want to make sure everybody got this one right. And so that's what the highlighting is here. But I hope this was helpful in sort of breaking down how to go about this. I know that this might be a video you need to watch again, or you need to come back to, but hopefully that was helpful.